Hello and welcome to Something Z, and welcome to the Halloween special, What If Deku Was Spider's Man? You heard that right, and the thumbnail isn't wrong. I am talking about the spooktacular Spider's Man, and the version of the web slinger that you may not know. So let me briefly explain on who he is real quick. So we start at Peter Parker's origin story, but instead of him just getting bit by a radioactive spider, he falls into a whole horde of them, with him getting eaten and killed. But because the spiders were radioactive, Peter's mind was spread across a group of spiders, giving them a sort of hive mind and making them think that they are all Peter Parker. And with that, they become a somewhat superhero, with him having super strength, durability, and near immortality. Okay, so I believe that's a decent rundown on the character of Spider's Man, so if you have arachnophobia, turn back now. Okay, now that's out of the way, let's roll the intro. So we begin this what if the day Izuku's teacher asked the class what they wanted to do for high school, with many raising their hands and shouting that they wanted to join the hero track, with Izuku doing the same, but in more of a shy and meek manner. But while the class was shouting, Bakugo raised his voice, and he told the class that the whole class was a bunch of rejects, and that at most they would become some useless sidekick to some unknown D-lister. And after he said that, he began to gloat about his quirk and abilities. But midway through, Bakugo finally noticed Izuku's hand, so he stopped. Then he immediately put his hand on his desk and exploded it. In which case, Izuku got flung to the wall behind him, and it flipped over his desk. And when Izuku landed, Bakugo walked over to him, and he told him that he was worse than the rest of the class, because unlike the rest of them who have a chance, he's just some weak, quirkless loser. And after some time, Bakugo and Izuku went back to their seats, and once they sat down, class continued as normal. Okay, so now we skip to the end of class. But this time, Izuku didn't stay behind to run over and write down new hero notes on his journal, like in the original timeline. But he was running to a laboratory because on that fateful day, Horizon Labs was having a tour of their facilities, which was such a big deal to Izuku because Horizon Labs is a place that creates leading-edge technology, and he was hoping that even if he couldn't get into UA, maybe he could find a way to come here so he can find a way to help people. So Izuku rushed to the lab, with him getting there right as the tour was about to begin. And throughout the tour, Izuku saw things he couldn't even imagine, such as something known as a Cryocube 3000, which was able to freeze any living creature without causing any harm to the organism, and a prototype room called the Break Room of Tomorrow, which was basically time travel, although they haven't worked out the kinks. But eventually, the group gets to a dome of spiders, with the head of the laboratory, Max Modell, telling the audience that they were getting covered in radiation to see the genetic alterations that would arrive to such an environment. And with Izuku being so entranced with everything he's seen on tour, he put his hands to the glass of the dome. And when he did, he was able to get a better look at the giant spiders that were around 10 feet below him. And with him wanting to get an even better look, he began to press harder on the glass, but eventually he pressed too hard. And when he did, the glass shattered, where he was leaning all of his body weight. And with that, he fell through the hole and into the dome below. And within seconds, Izuku was completely covered in spiders, with him having no hesitation eating the new fresh flesh that has fallen into their territory, with them biting and tearing his flesh on the outside, and some crawling even inside of Izuku, eating him from the inside out. And within less than a minute, Izuku was gone and he was reduced to practically nothing, with the spiders leaving nothing behind. Then before they could contain the spiders, they began to crawl out of the dome using a skylight. And while the spiders were escaping, people were running for places to hide, and security was trying to neutralize the spiders, so they shot at them with high-tech weaponry, killing a decent amount of them, but many were able to escape. And shortly afterward, Horizon Labs was closed down temporarily to make sure that everything was secured, and it was soon identified hours later that Izuku was the one that got killed by the spiders. And with that, Horizon took a full brunt of the blame for not making the glass as tough as they should have, with the news about Izuku's death spreading quite quickly. So much so that on the next day of class, there was a little announcement at the beginning of class, with the teacher announcing that Izuku was no longer with them. But after hearing the news, it seemed like they were all somewhat sad, but only a small few actually cared, with Bakugo seeming to take it the hardest, because even though he treated Izuku terribly, he was still someone he had known for years. But unknown to the class, there was a spider that was watching from the corner of the room. And after some time, it slipped out of the school, using holes that were in the school's walls. And after a bit of time, the spider came into a dark alley, and when it got into the alley, it saw a black cloud of spiders that were in the middle of creating something using the webs of the spiders to sew different fabrics together that they had taken in the middle of the night, with them being black, red, and blue. And after a couple more hours, they were finally able to mostly complete the outfit, with there being a small hole in the back of the costume. And once it was complete, the spiders crawled into the suit, with them filling up the costume so it looked like a decently muscular man. And once the final spider was in, they closed the slit with a couple webbings. And with that done, the humanoid-looking creature began to walk around the city, with them wanting to see what their new life can be, with them at the end of the day returning back to the alleyway, because they needed a place to conserve their energy, and they couldn't go back to the Midoriya residence because they didn't want to put what they believed to be their mother through anymore, and they believed that it would be better if she just believed that her son had died. And this continued on for months, was the spiders of Deku, just walking around town, also seeing what he can do. And he saw that with some mutated spiders, he can lift more than the average human, and that he was just generally superhuman. And because he was a hive of spiders, he had a lot of agility, with him spreading out the spiders. He also figured out that he had different powers, such as he could just stick to walls. Also, his spiders were mentally linked, so even if the spiders weren't there, he could tell what was happening from their field of vision, as if he was the one experiencing it. And the spiders survived by eating dead animals that they found in their wake, such as rats or raccoons, or even any other stray, such as cats sometimes. Also, the spiders were not just walking around, they looked around dumpsters for tools and supplies. And when they got what they needed, they returned back to the alley and they began to work. Then after a couple months of work, they were able to create prototype web shooters, which when they touched, they would shoot out a web from them, and the spiders placed them on the wrists of the outfit. Then once the spiders had completed the webbing, the hive began to swing around Musutafu, Japan. And because they still had the mind of Izuku, they had one dream, which was to become a hero. So they did just that, so the hive began to fight small crooks and do heroics, such as stop bank robbers, different gangsters. They have also stopped people from getting hit by speeding cars a few times. With Izuku being known after some time as an unknown vigilante, and with his reputation going up as time goes on, he caught the eyes of the pro heroes and the police force, with him being seen as a person who has taken the law into their own hands, and that they need to be dealt with. So one night when Izuku was back in his alleyway, just laying down, trying to conserve his energy, lowering his metabolism, police began to surround him. And when Izuku saw this, he jumped to his feet, and he was about to flee. But before he did anything, the police chief Kenji stepped in front of the rest of the armed forces, and he told Izuku that they needed to talk. And if he just went with them willingly, it would be more beneficial towards him, and maybe they could find a way to make him a hero legally. So hearing this, Izuku went with the police force willingly, with him getting into a cop car. And after around 20 minutes, Izuku was in a room with a desk, and he was somewhat handcuffed to a desk. But because he was made out of spiders, he could have easily slipped through at any given moment. And when he was locked up, he began to wait. And after a few moments, a small white animal like humanoid that had a scar on his face and Kenji walked into the room. And they sat down across from Izuku. And when they sat down, they began to question Izuku who and what he was, and what were his intentions. And because Izuku felt like he wasn't in any danger, he decided to respond truthfully, with him telling them who he was before the incident, and why he started to do heroics that eventually led him to getting into the station. And after hearing the story, the two got up, and they told Izuku that they needed to discuss what they were going to do with him. So they then left the room, leaving Izuku to think, with him wondering if he should just break out and try to escape. But knowing that he would be easily found, he would decide to just stay put. And after around 20 minutes of waiting, Principal Nezu walked back into the room, and he told him to come with him. And after doing a bit of walking, the two walked into the police car and they sped off, with Nezu and Izuku being in the back, while a police officer was being a chauffeur. And when they were going, Nezu told Izuku that he had been given two options, in which he won't be punished for taking the law into his own hands. And the options he gave Izuku was that he would get tested in order to find a way to turn Izuku back to the way he was before, or he would have to go into UA, and get a license later in his school career. But the only caveat was that he would have to take the exams just like everyone else and pass with his own merits. And after thinking of what he should do, Izuku asked where he was going to stay, because he still didn't want to go back to Inko. And in response, Nezu said that because he has a special case that has a lot of potential, until he graduates or turns back to normal, he will be set up in an apartment that was near the school. So with the living situation set, Izuku immediately said that he would attempt to join UA. Okay, so now we skip a couple months, and in that span of time, Izuku has gone set up in his apartment, and because Izuku is registered as dead, Izuku had to get a new identity, with him getting the name Hisashi Kumo, and he was labeled to have a mutation quirk that turned him into a swarm of spiders, that he labeled Hive Mind. And because in order to get into high school, he needed to go into a middle school, so he was placed into a nearby middle school, which was a different district than his old one. And whenever he wasn't in school, Izuku practiced and tinkered even more, with him getting even better at using his abilities. And throughout his normal day-to-day life, Izuku would keep on his spider suit, just so people wouldn't be horrified to talk or even look at him. So finally, it's time for the UA entrance exams. And when it was the morning of, Izuku was driven to the campus, and he was reminded that if he didn't want to get turned back to normal, he needed to pass this exam. And eventually, he got dropped off at the front gate of the school. And after the car drove off, Izuku began to look at the campus with his hundreds of eyes, and he began to prepare himself. And once he was ready, he began to walk towards the school. But after Izuku took a couple steps, he tripped on a rock, and he began to fall. But before he hit the ground, someone touched his back, and when they made contact, his costume and a couple dozen spiders began to float. But because the majority were still weighed, and because Izuku was thrown off his balance of him being partially weightless, Izuku hit the ground. And after Izuku made contact, the girl that touched his back undid the anti-gravity, and she began to apologize to Izuku for not catching him. And after Izuku accepted the apology, the two began to talk, with the girl asking why Izuku was in a full-on costume. But because Izuku was somewhat scared that she would freak out, Izuku mostly dodged the question, telling her that it was so that he could use it to contain his quirk. And after talking for a bit of time, the girl walked off, and she headed towards the gymnasium for the exams. And Izuku was going to walk to get his shooters approved before the exams. But when he was about to start walking, a familiar person with blonde hair walked past him, with him immediately recognizing him as Bakugo. And just seeing Bakugo filled Izuku with a mixture of emotions, because anger, because he saw the person who bullied him a majority of his life. Sadness, because he was a symbol for the life he left behind since he became a hive of spiders. But what filled him the most was a feeling of determination, that he wanted to become a hero, since he saw the person who kept on telling him that he was nothing, so he wanted to prove him wrong. So after being dazed for a bit, Izuku began to walk, with him getting his web shooters approved. Then after Izuku got them approved, Izuku went to the auditorium. Then later, after he believed that everyone was present, President Mike began to talk and explain the rules for both of the entrance exams. Okay, so now I skip an hour and Izuku and all the other participants that passed the written exams were currently standing outside of Fake City, getting ready for the second part of the exams. And while in this, Ida doesn't walk over to Izuku like in the canon. He, just like most of the other participants, were just staring at Izuku, confused on why he was in a full-on costume, with some feeling that he was way too confident that he was going to pass the exams. But something else that also caught the people's eyes was the fact that he seemed familiar, as if they had seen his costume somewhere before. And to be more specific, I'm talking about the time when Izuku was a vigilante. And because it was mainly kept a secret, with Izuku mostly being able to not get caught on camera. But there were some rare instances where people had the crime scenes described as Izuku, and they were able to take a quick shot at Izuku, but most of the times they were just blurry images. Anyways, Izuku did notice their stares through his many eyes, but he didn't really care, because his entire future was reliant on the fact that he passed. Then after a couple minutes, President Mike appeared on top of a tower, and he began to shout, saying that in the real world there are no countdowns, and he told them that the test now begins. So the gates of the fake city began to open, and when it did, Izuku shot out a web and he swung into the city, and because of that he was able to swing past the other contestants, giving him a lead that was only beaten by a guy with glasses that had engines sprouting from his legs. And when Izuku saw his first group of robots, he shot a web directly at one of them, and he flung himself at the robot at high speeds. And when he made impact, he turned it into a kick, completely destroying the two-pointer that he hit. Then he began to do the same thing to the robots in the nearby area, with him punching, kicking, and swinging at the bots. So by the time the exams were about to end, Izuku had around 53 points. But right after Izuku destroyed another two-pointer, the examiners released the zero-pointers, with it destroying buildings that were in his path. So seeing this, Izuku's hive mind survival instincts acted up, so they began to swing away from the danger along with everyone else. But after swinging for a few seconds, Izuku heard a cry of pain, and hearing this, Izuku stopped, with him sticking to a wall of a building, and once he was secured, he looked back, and when he did, he saw the girl that he talked to earlier, but now she was trapped, with her leg under rubble, and the zero-pointer was getting closer and closer to her. So seeing this, Izuku swung back, and when he got to her, he saw that there was a decent chunk of rubble that he needed to get off all at once. So Izuku then told the girl to not freak out under any circumstances. And when she agreed, hundreds of spiders began to crawl out of the hole in the suit, and they began to squeeze their bodies under the rubble. And once they were all under, the spiders using their super strength began to raise the rubble that was on the girl's leg. And while the spiders were making it easier for the girl to slip out, the main body that was still mostly formed grabbed the girl and he took her out of the rubble, freeing her. Then once she was safe, the spiders quickly dropped the rubble, and they returned into the suit, restoring Izuku to his full power. Then seeing as she was injured, and the robot was still coming closer to them, Izuku picked her up and he began to swing away, with him stopping and putting her down after a couple city blocks. And after Izuku put her down, you could see that the girl was thankful, but all the while somewhat freaked out about what was under the costume. But before anything could happen, President Mike appeared on the speakers, and he told the participants that the exams were now over, and that if you were injured, go to Recovery Girl to get healed, and that if you were fine, it was time for you to leave. So hearing this is when Izuku and the girl split up, with her going to get healed, while Izuku returned back to his apartment. Okay, so now we skip about a week, and Izuku was sitting on his couch when he got a knock on his door. Then after a couple seconds, the door opened. And when it did, Nezu like normal walked through the door, but this time All Might walked through the door as well in a yellow suit, and he seemed somewhat drained from his work from the day. And after seeing them, Izuku jumped to his feet and he welcomed the two into his apartment, especially All Might, who he fanboyed for a bit. Then the three sat down with Nezu and All Might sitting across from Izuku, and he told Izuku the results for how he did during the exams. And they began with the written exams, telling Izuku that he was able to pass with flying colors. Then they began to talk about the second phase, with them telling him that he was able to get a total of 55 robot points, and Izuku thought they were done. But then they continued on, saying that those weren't the only points, with Nezu slamming a piece of technology on a coffee table, and he turned it on. And when he did, a hologram of Izuku saving the girl showed up. Then All Might chimed in, telling him that there were also rescue points. and with him saving the girl with efficiency and care, he was able to score an extra 22 points, giving Izuku a total of 77 points. He was also told that he was able to tie for first place with a young Katsuki Bakugo. Then All Might told Izuku congratulations, he passed, and that he had seen his previous exploits, and that he hoped that he would continue to be the hero that he has proven to be in the past. And hearing this, Izuku just nodded his spider colony head. Okay, so now I skip to the first day of school, and currently Izuku is standing in front of class 1A, and Izuku is wearing his uniform over the spider costume. And when Izuku was ready, he took in many simultaneous gulps of air, and he opened the door. And when he did, the first thing Izuku saw was Bakugo and the guy with glasses that Izuku recognized from the exams were arguing with each other about Bakugo having his feet on his desk. And the two stopped when they saw Izuku, with Bakugo also being told that he tied with Izuku, so he was just watching him. However, the guy with glasses sped towards Izuku and he told Izuku that it was a disgrace for Izuku to be dressed up as a clown on their very first day of UA. But Izuku in response just told the guy that it was just so that the class wouldn't get repulsed by its quirk. And when the guy heard this, he decided to just let it go, since he remembers Izuku wearing the costume during the entrance exams. So once the guy let it go, he introduced himself as Tenya Ida, and the two began to talk about the exams. But after a minute, someone pokes Izuku's shoulder, and when Izuku turns his head, he sees the girl that he saved during the exams, who introduced herself as Ochako. And the three began to talk, and after a couple minutes, Ochako told Izuku that he doesn't have to hide behind the costume. But before Izuku could answer her in any way, the people in the classroom noticed a sleeping bag in the doorway, and when the class noticed it, they all quieted down. Then once they were silent, a grown man started to climb out, and when he was completely standing, he told the class that he was their teacher, and that they took way too long to get quiet, and that they would have to work on that. Then he told them to get dressed in their PE clothes and meet him in the fields outside. Okay, so now we skip half an hour, and when Aizawa believed that all the students were present, he gave Bakugo a ball, and he told him to throw the ball as hard as he could, and unlike normal, he was allowed to use his quirk. So after prepping himself, Bakugo threw the ball using an explosion to fire it. And after it flew for some time, a number appeared on Aizawa's phone, and he told the class that the number was 705.2 meters. Then he told the class that UA can only accept the best of the best, and because of that they will be doing a quirk apprehension test, and the person in last place will be completely kicked out of the school. Okay, so the first test was a 50-meter dash, with Izuku going up against Bakugo, and when the two were told to start, Izuku sprinted, with him getting a score of 4.5 seconds. Then for the grip strength, Izuku got first place with him getting 700 plus kg. Then after it was a sandbox, so when it was Izuku's turn, Izuku ran the box and he completely cleared the box with ease. And the test kept on going, with Izuku getting pretty good scores during them, until eventually it was time for the ball throw. And when it was Izuku's turn, he pulled back his arm and he threw the ball as hard as he could. But when Izuku threw the ball, like Ochako threw hers, it went completely outside the campus of the school. And by the time the ball hit the ground, the number that appeared on Aizawa's phone, 2,340 meters. And after Izuku got his number, Aizawa began to do calculations, with him finishing the rankings after a few minutes. And once he was done, on a hologram, Aizawa showed the scores, with Izuku getting the highest score thanks to his super strength. However, in last place was Mineta, and seeing that he was in last place, Mineta ran to Aizawa, and he began to plead and cry, telling him not to kick him out. But after a couple of sobs, Aizawa wrapped up Mineta in his scarf, and he dragged him to the principal's office. And after Mineta got dragged away, the class never saw him again. Okay, so now he skipped to the next day, and when the class was about to start, instead of Aizawa walking into the room, it was All Might, who was wearing his Golden Age outfit. And after the class calmed down from the fact that All Might was in their classroom, All Might told the class to get dressed in their hero costumes and to meet him at Ground Beta. Okay, so Izuku's hero costume is nothing special. It's literally his normal costume that he wears every day. But let me tell you the upgrades that he obtained after he got into UA. So the costume itself got made into a more durable fabric, so it can withstand more cutting, stabbing, and temperature damage. And the web shooters got more of an upgrade, so the web shooters are now smaller and the webbing shoots out faster and the tensile strength was stronger than it was before. And on Izuku's costume there were small pockets, and in those pockets there were multiple containers for his webbings, so that if he ran out he could quickly replenish. And on his palms there were openings that he can open and close that if he really needs to, he can shoot himself out and spread out his spiders. Okay, so now we skip to when All Might believed that all the students were at the meeting place. And when he was ready, he put the class into teams of 2, with Izuku being teamed up with Ochako. Then once the teams were created, All Might told them that they will be doing heroes versus villains exercise, where the heroes will have to find a bomb in a building and fight the villains until either the time runs out or they touch the bomb. And once he explained that, All Might pulled teams out of the boxes, with the first matchup being Bakugo and Ida versus Izuku and Ochako. And once the matchup was revealed, Bakugo and Ida went to the building with the bomb, while Izuku and Ochako stood outside the building coming up with a plan. Meanwhile, the rest of the class went to another location so they could watch the match. Then once the time was up, Izuku opened the holes on his hands, and dozens of its spiders came crawling out. Then immediately, they ran to the side of the building, and they began to crawl up his walls, so that if the bomb was near a window, Izuku would immediately know the location. And while the spiders were crawling, Izuku's main body closed the holes, and he and Ochako began to run inside the building. And after a minute of running, the two were able to get to a split in the hallways. But before they were able to turn a corner, Bakugo jumped out from behind a corner, and he fired an explosion. And seeing this, Izuku quickly pushed Ochako down, with him getting hit instead. And although it hit him and killed a couple hundred spiders, the suit was still intact. And when Izuku got hit, he immediately webbed Bakugo's eyes and he punched him in the gut, launching him back a couple feet. And when Bakugo hit the ground, Izuku told Ochako that he would keep Bakugo occupied while she goes off to look for the bomb, and that he will tell her where it is if he finds it first. Then hearing this, she nods her head and runs off. And once Ochako is gone, Bakugo is finally able to get the webbing that was on his eyes off of him. And he fired an explosion, launching himself at Izuku, and the two began a fight, with Bakugo firing explosions to either harm Izuku and to somewhat keep his distance, especially because during the apprehension test, he was able to easily tell that he would lose if he was forced into a hand-to-hand combat. Meanwhile, Izuku was focusing his efforts on getting close and attacking Bakugo, all the while he was putting all of his effort into not getting hit by any more explosions, because he knew that if he took a full volley of explosions, he would be much weaker. Also, he was trying to buy time so either himself or Ochako would find the bomb. And after a couple minutes, Izuku saw through one of the spiders that he sent out earlier where the bomb's location was. So on a comm he had somewhere in the main body, he told Ochako the room number that the bomb was being held in, and he told her that he would try to get there soon. Then after he said that, Izuku was able to get close enough where he was able to punch Bakugo in the gut, launching him back once again. But this time, Bakugo got back up, and he pointed an arm at Izuku. Then with his other hand, he began to go for a pin that was on his glove. And when All Might saw it, he shouted for Bakugo not to pull the pin, or he could easily kill Kumo. And being able to tell that Bakugo was about to fire a massive explosion, Izuku began to sink. So right when Bakugo put his fingers on the pin, Izuku through all of his fiery mouth said very loudly, "Please don't do this, Kachan." And hearing this, Bakugo was stunned, and he stopped. Then he demanded for Izuku to tell him how he knows that name. But while Bakugo was off his game, Izuku immediately shot out a web which hit Bakugo in the chest. Then after it stuck, Izuku used it to speed towards Bakugo and he kicked him in the chest, launching him to the next room over. And after Bakugo slammed into a wall, Izuku began to shoot out as many webs as possible, creating a thick wall of webbings in the hallway. And when Bakugo recovered, he flew towards the wall as fast as he could, and he began to barrage the wall with explosions, with him eventually creating a hole through, and he stepped through. And when he stepped to the other side, he saw that Izuku was gone, so he began to search for him. Meanwhile, Izuku was a couple hallways away, and he was running towards where he knew the bomb was, with him getting to the room after a couple minutes. And when he got to the room, Izuku saw Ochako and Ida at a standstill, with Ochako trying to get the bomb, while Ida moved the bomb away from her with his super speed. And when Izuku got into the room, he jumped into the fight, and he immediately sped towards Ida, with him shooting webs at Ida's feet, but he was able to dodge. And seeing this as an opportunity, Ochako ran at the bomb. And Ida seeing this returned his attention to Ochako, so he turned around and he was about to run to her. But when he turned his back on Izuku, Izuku shot out webs and he landed them on the wrist of Ida, so he couldn't escape Izuku. And when Ida noticed this, he tried to escape, but no matter how hard he tried, he wasn't able to break free. And with that bit of distraction, Ochako was given enough time to put her hand onto the bomb. And once she put her hand onto the bomb, All Might on the speakers announced that the hero team has won. And when the exercise was over, everyone walked to the location the rest of the class was. And Izuku was able to tell for the rest of the day that Bakugo would have his eyes on him, staring. Okay, so now I skip to the end of the day, and Izuku was beginning to walk to the exit of the school. But before he was able to get outside the school, Bakugo grabbed him by the arm and he dragged Izuku to an empty classroom. And with them now alone, Bakugo simply asked Izuku, how did he know that name? And Izuku was thinking of lying to him, and he tried to come up with some excuse. But after a couple seconds, he told Bakugo that he was Izuku. And hearing this, Bakugo told him that he's lying, and he began to barrage Izuku with a series of questions, in which Izuku was able to answer them all correctly. Then Bakugo shouted, asking why he pretended to be dead, and what's up with his superhuman abilities, and if there were gizmos in that costume to help him. But Izuku just simply took off his mask, and when he did, he revealed all the spiders that were stacked on top of each other that formed his head. And when Bakugo saw the head of Izuku, he freaked out. But after a couple seconds, he asked why did he fake his death, and did he know how much his poor mother suffered after his death. But Izuku responded that he was no longer the Izuku that he knew, and that he would rather his mother move on with her life than live with the fact that her son had become a monster with many faces. Then he put the mask back on, and he asked Bakugo would he keep his secret for him. And after pausing for a couple seconds, Bakugo just sighed, and he told Izuku that he promised he wouldn't tell anyone. Then once that was settled, the two began to walk to the front gates of UA. But when they got there, two people were waiting for them, with them being Ida and Ochako. And the four began to walk to the train station so they can get back home. Okay, so now we skip a couple weeks, and class was about to start. And when it did, Aizawa walked into the room. And when he did, he told the class that there was something important that they needed to do. And scared, the class was wondering if he was talking about having to do another apprehension test. But after a long pause, he told the class that they would be coming up with who will be the class representatives. And the second he said that, the class got louder, with some shouting, raising their hands, telling people to pick them. But after a bit of time, Ida told the class to quiet down. And after they did, Ida suggested that they did a vote to see who would be picked. So after doing the votes, the people that were chosen were Izuku for class rep, and Momo for deputy rep. Then once the voting was over, it was time for lunch. So Izuku, Ochako, and Ida were eating lunch, and while they were eating, Izuku was wondering if he would do a good job, but Ochako and Ida told him that he would do good. But before they could finish, alarms rang out through the entire school, and once the alarms started blaring, upperclassmen immediately jumped to their feet. And confused about what was happening, the three began to try to get the attention of an upperclassman, with them eventually getting the attention of a junior, and he told them that the alarms meant that there was a breach at the school, and that they should hurry to the panic rooms because it could be a villain. So hearing this, the three ran into the hallway, but before they realized it, they were stuck in a crowd that was pushing and shoving. And with Izuku wondering what was going on, he opened the holes that were on his palms, and a couple dozen spiders came out, using their webbing to get to the glass walls around him. And when the spiders on the left side looked, they saw that there were a bunch of reporters that were at the front door. And seeing this, Izuku realized that the school was not under attack. So Izuku's main body jumped up, with him sticking to the ceiling, and then he ran to the other side of the hallway, and when he got to an exit sign, he stuck to it, and all the Izukus began to shout at once, with them filling the entire hallway with sound that there were no villains outside, and that it was just a bunch of reporters. And hearing many Izukus, the crowd calmed down, enough so that they were able to actually look outside the window, and when they did, they saw that Izuku was right. So after around 20 minutes, the students were able to return back to their classes in a calm and orderly manner. And because Ida wasn't the one who calmed down the crowd, Izuku kept his role as class rep. Okay, so now we skip a few days, and when class was about to start, Aizawa told the class to get dressed into their hero costumes and to get on the bus that was waiting for them outside. So now we skip some time, and when the bus stopped, the class found themselves at a giant dome, and the person waiting for them was the Pro Hero 13. And when they were off the bus, she introduced the class to the USJ, and she began to give them a speech while walking them into the building about how they are skilled and have powerful quirks that can be used to help many people and save many lives. But then she told them that the opposite is true as well, and that if they are not careful, many people can die under their watch. But the second that the door closed to the building, the lights of the USJ began to flicker on and off. And seeing this, 13 stopped talking. Then after a couple seconds of silence, a portal began to open in the plaza, and when it was fully formed, dozens and dozens of villains began to walk out, with the first couple that Izuku saw being a villain that had a hand over his face, and a villain that seemed to be covered in the same energy that made up the portal, that Izuku suspected was his doing, and a giant bird creature that was about the same size as All Might. And once the army of villains were done walking out, filling up the entire plaza, the portal closed behind them. And seeing that the villains were done appearing, Eraser put on his glasses and he told 13 to get the students out of there. And he told 13 to get the students out of there. Then he jumped down a flight of stairs and he began to fight the whole group of villains. And Izuku was about to jump in to join the fight. But when Aizawa jumped down, the portal villain flew to the group of students. Then he stretched himself and completely surrounded himself around the class. And seeing this, Izuku opened up his hand and spread out his spider onto everyone in Class 1A. And the reason he did this was so that if he needed to, or if they got split up, he would be able to tell what was happening. Because with him assuming that his enemy has teleportation, he suspects that he would use that against the class. Anyways, when the portal villain surrounded the class, he began to inspect the group, and after a couple seconds, he muttered that he isn't here. He was supposed to be here. But right after he said that, Bakugo, Kirishima, and Izuku's main body launched themselves at the villain, and they tried to attack him, but their attacks just seemed to go through him. And as a comeback, Kurogiri began to cover the class in his energy, and after a couple seconds, Izuku was completely wet. And Izuku, thanks to him being comprised of spiders, knew he could hold his air for a period of time. But he knew he needed to get out of there quick so he could help the others. But while he was trying to swim, his eyes picked up movement. And after a couple seconds, a villain with a shark-like quirk began to swim towards Izuku, and he tried to take a bite out of him. But before the villain was able to, Sue appeared, and she landed on top of the villain's head, kicking him, and in the process launched him many feet down. Then she shot out her tongue and wrapped Izuku in it. Then she began to swim to the surface, with her placing Izuku onto a boat. Then after Izuku was secured, Sue was about to jump back into the water to see if she could find any more of their classmates. But before she jumped in, Izuku looked through all the eyes that he spread across the USJ, and he was able to tell everyone else's location, so he was able to tell that none of their classmates were near them. But unluckily, when Sue looked over the boat, she was able to tell that the boat was completely surrounded by villains. And once the two saw this, they began to try to think of a plan for them to try to get out of the situation. And in the process, they talked to each other about each other's quirks in order to think clearly. But anyways, after a couple minutes, a villain began to manipulate the water around them, forming a giant hand. So seeing this, Izuku knew that he needed to do something in order to distract the villain. So he opened a hole, and hundreds of spiders came out. And once they were free, they jumped off the ship, and they jumped onto the face of the villain, completely covering his face, making it so he could no longer see. And in the process, he began to freak out, with him losing concentration. And in the process, the water hand he had formed began to go wild, with it splashing around a couple times. And while he was freaking out, Sue grabbed Izuku and she jumped, and when they got to the highest they could go, Izuku shot out a web, bringing them to the ceiling of the USJ. And by the time they got secured on the ceiling, the water hand did one final slam, creating a giant wave throwing all the villains off balance. But in the process, the spiders that Izuku sent out had died from a mixture of force and or drowning. And once they were secured on the ceiling, the two were wondering where to go. So Izuku began to look again through the other spider eyes, and he saw that Aizawa was currently getting beat up by what he assumed was the leaders of the attack, and he saw that at the front doors their classmates were trying to fight the portal villain. So the two split up, with Sue crawling her way to the front of the USJ, while Izuku swung towards the plaza as fast as he could. And when he got to above the plaza, he saw Aizawa being pinned by the bird creature he saw earlier, and he was bleeding. Also, the hand villain, who he believed to be the leader of the attack, seemed to be having a temper tantrum from something the portal villain had said to him, who Izuku just saw fly to the plaza. So without a second thought, Izuku jumped down, using all of his strength, and he tried to kick Nomu in the back. But when he made impact, it seemed like the Nomu got hurt, but no visible injuries were made. And seeing this, Izuku jumped down, and he landed in front of the hand villain, and he tried to go in for a punch. But right before his fist made contact, the bird monster that was a couple feet away immediately appeared in front of Shigaraki, with him tanking the full attack of Izuku. Then before Izuku was able to get out of the way, Nomu simply backhanded Izuku, and he made him go flying until he crashed into a tree. And thankfully, Izuku was made out of spiders, so this attack that would have killed an average human only killed a portion of him. So Izuku got back up, with his head being somewhat slouched and kinda baggy, with there being a dent in his mask. Then he jumped back into the fight, and seeing this, Shigaraki told Nomu not to interfere so he could keep Eraser down. So Nomu obeyed, and when Izuku got to Shigaraki, he punched him in the gut, launching him, but he was able to quickly recover thanks to a Kurogiri portal that launched him back. So the three began to fight, with Kurogiri mainly being support, and Shigaraki trying to hit Izuku with his hands, and the two others trying to get into hand-to-hand combat. And after around 30 seconds of fighting, Shigaraki, using a portal from Kurogiri, was able to put his hand onto Izuku's chest, which completely decayed that portion of his outfit and destroyed his entire chest, killing hundreds of spiders within seconds. But with this, it was revealed to Shigaraki that Izuku was made solely of spiders. And in this moment, the Hive decided to stop trying to be human, so they sent out a wave of themselves, with them jumping onto Shigaraki, completely covering his body. And beginning to panic, Shigaraki shouted for help. And all the while, he kept using his quirk to decay the spiders that were on him. And in response, Nomu appeared standing over the spiders that were remaining in the costume, which was still a couple hundred, and it brought his fist down, completely smashing the spiders, killing them immediately, making a crater where his hands landed. Then about 100 spiders, wanting to avoid getting decayed, jumped onto Nomu and then they began to crawl, focusing their efforts on avoiding punches that Nomu launched onto itself in order to try to kill them, while in the process trying to bite him. And once the punches onto himself, Nomu was able to kill many spiders, but many of them were able to survive, even if some of them did get somewhat injured. And even Kurogiri was having a time with the spiders, with him trying to get the spiders off of Shigaraki, with him even teleporting some of the spiders away to the front doors, in which some of Izuku was able to reunite with some of the spiders that he left behind earlier. And with about 20 spiders that were on Shigaraki, they kept clumping up and turning into an arm and punching him, trying to do damage while they still had time. But after some time, many of the spiders were dead, and Izuku was close to the point where he could no longer fight. But before Izuku was at his last legs, the front doors of the USJ burst open. And when the doors burst open, the people in the plaza took a quick glance. And when they did, they saw All Might, and he wasn't smiling. Then he immediately sped towards the plaza, and he was able to move Aizawa and a spider that was on Nomu that was about to be crushed. And he brought the two around 10 feet away, and he told Izuku to bring Aizawa to safety. And listening, the spider nods. And all the spiders that were still alive in the battlefield quickly crawled away, and they clumped together and they went under Aizawa, and they began to drag him away to the front entrance. And while they were moving, Izuku was wondering if he really should have left the fight, and whether he should jump back in. But just then, through the spiders that were still on Bakugo, Kirishima, and Todoroki, he saw that they just got to the plaza, and they were helping All Might. So he believed that they had it under control, so the spider colony kept on going, with them reuniting with the other part of him at the front gates. And after Izuku got back with Aizawa, the class in 13 laid him down, and they tried their best to take care of him before reinforcements came. Then a couple minutes later, Izuku saw Nomu go flying through the air, with him breaking through the roof of the USJ. Then Izuku looked towards the plaza, and he saw Shigaraki running towards All Might to try to hit him with his quirk. Meanwhile, All Might wasn't moving. But before Shigaraki made contact, gunshots rang, and they hit Shigaraki in non-lethal areas. And when Izuku looked behind him, he saw the teachers of Yue, plus Recovery Girl and Ida. And on the shoulder of Ida, there was one of Izuku's spiders that he placed earlier, who told the teachers before they left that Aizawa was heavily injured, so they brought Recovery Girl with them. Who, thanks to the fact that he was still awake, Recovery Girl kissed him, which healed him to the point where he was no longer at risk of dying. Meanwhile, Shigaraki and Kurogiri left through a portal, but before they left, they told All Might that they were the League of Villains, and that they will come back and find a way to not just kill him, but kill that spider freak that he called a student. Then once Shigaraki said that, the portal closed. Okay, so now we skip a couple hours, and everyone has returned back to the school, with Izuku being able to reunite with all the spiders that were remaining, and his costume that was left in the plaza, in which he closed a hole that was on the chest by shooting a web at his chest. And because so many of his spiders died, the legs were the only parts of Izuku that had spiders in it, with the rest being completely empty. So the spiders rolled it up so it wasn't just dragging on the floor, and a single spider was on top of the empty head, so the spiders could see. And once Izuku was ready, he began to walk out of the school, and waiting for him outside at the front gates was Ochako and Ida, who when he got to them began to walk home together. And this is where I'm going to leave this Halloween special. I hope you enjoyed it. But for the people that are still here, I'm telling you that this isn't the only thing I'm doing for Halloween, and that I'm actually planning on doing an evil route for this What If, and which I hope comes out soon after this one. Hopefully not, maybe the day after. But anyway, scheduling. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you next time on Something Z. Happy Halloween.